It's an honor to be speaking here at Hollywood. Both my wife Doris and I are proud to be members of this community, although we only are here occasionally. Thanks to Dannon and Scott for their help in setting this up. The title for today is Advent Horizon. But let me begin with a brief, sad story. Last month in the Mediterranean Sea, about halfway between the North African country of Tunisia and Italy, 7 men clung to fishing nets. They were trying to immigrate into Europe, and as often happens all too commonly, their boat had capsized. But just as their bodies were being pulled out of the water, as the fishermen lifting them up saw that these were men and not fish, they cut the nets loose. The 7 immigrants tragically slipped beneath the horizon. Even though this happened just in June, there's a biblical quality to this story. It seems almost like it could be a parable told 2,000 years ago. After all, Jesus literally said, "Be fishers of men," and so this news is terribly ironic. A true story of precisely what not to do. We aren't the only ones troubled by this incident. I was watching the news and I saw the Pope Francis visit a small island where this had happened. He laid a wreath in the water, said a Christian prayer about the growing globalization of indifference, and listened to other immigrants tell their stories of escape, trial, and hope. And it got me thinking, the Christian tradition, particularly Adventism, turns believers into immigrants, pilgrims just passing through. There is tension in that identity. We know it, be in the world but not of the world. On the one hand, it can lead to a kind of apocalyptic detachment. Why care when it will all burn in the end? A sort of nihilism. On the other hand, we're very much tied to this world. And I have to admit, which of us doesn't like a few pleasures of this world? After all, I was at a Dodger game last night, which they lost. Some argue for some sort of balance, but calls for balance in life make little sense to me. What does balance look like when we're talking about life and spirituality? 6 days of labor, just one for God, be in the world but not of the world. One cannot just be a Christian nowadays. One has to explain, I'm not that kind. And sometimes it seems like the culture of Adventism, more than its beliefs, is our true connection to each other. It can be disorienting. Be in the world, but not of the world. There is tension, no balance. On this topic of identity, I'd like to share some work from a contemporary artist I like. Her name is Janine Antoni. She often works in non-traditional media in the spaces between performance and sculpture. For instance, this is her work. It's called Gnaw. It's 600 pounds of chocolate, which sounds delicious. And then in the background there, which you could walk around, is 600 pounds of lard. The title is Gnaw. She's gnawed on both big blocks. The next one is called Loving Care. And it's a performance she did with Loving Care hair dye. She's painting with her hair there. In the next one, Butterfly Kisses. The media is CoverGirl Thick Lash Mascara. It's a lot of flicks with her eyelashes. And in this one, Lick and Lather. Lick and Lather. We have 2 self-portrait busts. One made of chocolate. Recently, one of my students said, "What's not to like? Chocolate that looks like yourself." The other one is made of soap. She's licked one and lathered up, bathed with the other. In the next clip, you're going to see her talking about one of my favorite works. It's a short 2-minute clip, and I'll just let it play now. It's from the PBS series Art 21. I like that a lot. Just for a moment, I would touch the horizon. I also like what Antoni says about balance. It wasn't that I was getting more balanced, but that I was getting more comfortable with being out of balance. I resonate with that embrace of tension. Perhaps you do as well. Rather than resolve the pulls left or right, she uses that tension to move forward, in this case, towards her goal, the horizon. Horizons themselves are about tension. I like how the New International Version translates Job 26:10. He marks out the horizon on the face of the waters for a boundary between light and darkness. It sounds almost apocalyptic. A horizon is a boundary, light and dark, sky and land, here and hereafter. Think of the last time you were at the beach. As far as we can see, water and sky appear separate until we cannot separate the two and they meet. But there's actually nothing there. Sail forward, and we're going in a circle. Infinite space, it's an illusion. In fact, we are all constantly standing in horizon space. It's not only out there, it's always present here. Our feet on the ground, but nothing lies between our heads and infinite space. We poke the boundless. As Christian pilgrims, we are immigrants passing through these illusory boundaries, from this world to the next, from the known to the unknown. As spiritual immigrants, we move. But where are we as spiritual immigrants going, and what are we doing on this earth? Perhaps a worldly immigrant can help. Albert Hirschman was born in Berlin in 1915. He studied economics in Paris and London and fought on the anti-fascist side in the Spanish Civil War. He emigrated from Germany to France to escape the conservatism of Hitler, served in the French army until France's collapse, and then helped to organize an underground railway for refugees called the Emergency Rescue Committee. They rescued artists, writers, philosophers, everyone and their families, Jews and non-Jews alike, including some famous people like Hannah Arendt, the surrealist André Breton, Marc Chagall, Marcel Duchamp. They saved over 2,000 people by helping them immigrate. After World War II, Hirschman himself immigrated to America, joined the U.S. Army, and was actually a translator at Nuremberg. Even though he taught at elite universities, he often moved with his family to Latin America, and there he worked as a development economist. He just died last year in December. Some say he deserves a Nobel Prize. A biography about him was just published, and the title is Worldly Philosopher. What can a worldly philosopher, an economist, teach us about ethics, not to mention God? In a New Yorker, out last week, Malcolm Gladwell writes about Hirschman, and I like this line. He was a planner who saw virtue in the fact that nothing went as planned. Are you a planner? Sometimes you see things don't go as they should. He saw virtue in it. In fact, he wrote some books about how good that is. In fact, one of his major contributions to development is the theory of the hiding hand. The hiding hand, which he calls a principle for action. And here, let me read a little passage where he defines what the hiding hand is. Creativity always comes as a surprise to us. Therefore, we can never count on it, and we dare not believe in it until it has happened. Hence, the only way in which we can bring our creative resources fully into play is by misjudging the nature of the task, by presenting it to ourselves as more routine, more simple, undemanding of genuine creativity than it will turn out to be. Creativity comes from openness. He gives example of how not knowing leads us to underestimate projects and then create something great. Perhaps you've experienced this. Something occurs that you did not plan for. It's a challenge you would not have knowingly undertaken. You're not sure how to proceed, but you do. And you're not sure why or how, but you overcome the challenge and learn more about your own ability to think and act creatively. Can this also extend beyond the personal to the communal? Can communities, even congregations, find themselves more creative as they confront challenges? What lies beyond that hiding hand? What lies beyond that horizon? The horizon is both in this world but not of this world. It requires the world, even the sea that swallowed those Tunisian immigrants. Profound creativity requires an abyss. In fact, this Latin phrase I like, de profundis, means out of the depths. It refers to the opening of Psalm 130. Out of the depths I have cried out to you, O God. In fact, that cry, out of the depths I have cried to you, O God, could have been the prayer of the man helped by the Good Samaritan. That famous story from Luke is the gospel reading for this week, and let's turn to that in our bulletins. Or read it off the screen. In this week of cable news focused on the George Zimmerman trial, I like that this starts out with a lawyer. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. Here is the exact opposite of Hirschman's hiding hand theory. This man wants a rational way to get from this world to the next. He doesn't want to be surprised by spirituality. He wants to figure it out. Jesus answers with a focus not on the rational, but by using creativity, a story, to point us to the empathy that is core to God's moral law of universal love. How do we know that it was wrong to cut the nets that those immigrants were holding on to? It's not only the horizons between land and sea where immigrants dangle in limbo, they are tied up in our bureaucratic systems, caught between making a living and living outside the law. The story goes on. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jericho to Jerusalem, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. This happens even today. By now, chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw, he passed on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him, bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I'll repay you when I come back. Which of these 3 proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, The one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, You go and do likewise. Clearly, the hero of the famous Good Samaritan story is not the elite religious leaders. It's the ethical Samaritan. an outsider who steps in. He's on the margins of the dominant faith. He doesn't let the hypocrisy of the others keep him from doing the right thing. Imagine if you saw church leaders acting that way, avoiding moral action and thinking first about their self-interest. Imagine, if you will, religious leaders fighting against equality, inclusion, choice, and openness. I know it's hard, but try. Sometimes when communities seem more focused on their own self-preservation than moral action, we question their fundamental goodness. Those in control sometimes respond, love it, or leave it. Too often our political and religious leaders act like those fishermen. They're just doing their job. The economist Hirschman also wrote a good book on this problem of being part of something but also disagreeing about where it's going. The book is titled Exit, Voice, and Loyalty: Responses to Decline in Firms, Organizations, and States. And here's his argument. He argues that we can vote with our feet and exit if we don't like what's going on, or stay put and critique with our voice. He argues that while those in power wish that everyone would love them or leave, organizations are better off when they recognize the loyalty of those who stay and constructively critique. It's good for the organization to have those voices around. Mr. Hirschman got the idea for his book during a terrible train journey in Nigeria. He concluded that the country's railways were getting worse because the most vocal customers were shifting to the roads. Perhaps this can apply to faith communities. The fact is that the priests and Levites of our faith community seem to prefer that some just exit. After all, while exiting can make a big splash, it's ultimately passive. It loses its influence over time. Is there value in not leaving, but in becoming a voice for good? Yes, particularly here and now. After all, we're talking about apocalypse. Advent means coming into place, view, or being. To be an Adventist is to believe that the divine is coming into place, into view, into being. It is looking into the horizon, that space between land and sky, and seeing something being revealed. That's the revelation in Apocalypse. We see and speak together in that space between the water and the sky, the profound and the infinite. We empathize with the immigrants, the marginalized, because that is who we are. And it is in this transition of being and becoming that we are activated to go where the hiding hand hides. We are all immigrants merely passing along this Jericho road. Should we not lend a hand? Martin Luther King Jr. states on this passage, on the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion, the point of the story, is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. Our safety nets get cut too easily. Our safety nets get cut too easily. This road, our path forward, is rough. The tension between heaven and earth is great, and the horizon lies too far. Perhaps it was precisely because the Good Samaritan was on the margins that he had empathy for the marginalized. There is no such thing as a balanced, centered spirituality. There's only the tension in the Advent. But as we move forward, our borders will break. That is the apocalyptic revelation. It seems a long way off, but there's something out there, hidden. Until then, to paraphrase Guns N' Roses, use your illusion of what can be. The illusion of the horizon orients us. Pilots use horizons to tell up from down. Artists use them to create order when they restructure reality on a canvas. You and I rely on horizons when looking at photographs to give us a sense of space and place. And this here was taken by one of my colleagues at Pacific Union College, Brian Kyle. Borders mark the abyss, but they also mark the infinite beyond. As immigrants, we must lean in, and when we do, we'll see there's no line, there is no border, only the horizon lies ahead. Let us cross the border towards the infinite. Hand in hand, we press on. Thank you.